Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome everyone again to another episode of the Gin and Tonic Show. Today we are discussing the Golden Age of Islam. If you'd like to join the show, just send a contact request on Skype to the Gin and Tonic Show. If you'd like to join the panel as a co-host or guest, you can ask any question. You can talk about what we're talking about. You can bring up a subject about Islam, the Middle East, religion, philosophy, politics, whatever. Just send a contact request to the Gin and Tonic Show on Skype. Remember that this is being recorded for later upload. It's being recorded for upload. It's being recorded for upload on YouTube later and is streamed live on Blog TV. Furthermore, when you come onto the show, make sure to mute and minimize your Blog TV. Otherwise, you will hear and see everything twice on a delay, which will disorient you and disrupt the flow of the show. Okay, so the Islamic Golden Age. What was it? When did it start? What was it about? What was the cause? Stop spamming. We'll start with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and here's the first misnomer. It is not the Golden Islamic Age, it's the Golden Arab Age, because it is something to do with scientific advancement between the 9th and 13th century, and we had Arabs. They were Christians, they were Jews, and yes, there were some Muslims, and yes, there were more Muslims than Christians or Jews together. But that does not mean that it was the Muslim Golden Age, because it is not that somebody opened the Quran, read a couple of pages and decided, hey, I am going to invent the caterpillar water pump. No, what happened is that a lot of people went and looked at what the science at the time was able to describe and what they already had in knowledge, and then they developed this. The high culture city of the time was Baghdad, where the whole civilization and all the knowledge was centered. And then it spread from there, and it spread all the way into the south of Italy, into the south of Spain. It went all across Africa. It spread all the way into India and into Turkey. So what we have is advancements. In other words, they discovered, they furthered the whole science in optics, and yes, you can say they laid the foundation for things like the camera, but they did not invent a camera. There were no real inventions made at the time. It was all a furthering of existing science. It was brilliant, it was fantastic, it was science-centric, it had nothing to do with religion. There were a lot of people who said we need to split science from religion. So that's why I say it's the Arab Golden Age. Yes, a tremendous amount was done. No, it did not lay the foundation for the French Revolution or the technology age or anything like that. It was an advancement. It came to a halt very suddenly when the church took over, and the Emperor Friedrich at the time, he died in 1249, if I'm not mistaken. What actually happened is that the people then were a little bit afraid of what science was doing to the religious church of the Christians at the time. So what they did then in Europe, they pulled the plug. They confiscated all the materials, they confiscated the books, they confiscated the instruments. Everything was just taken away. The manuscripts were either translated or destroyed. Muslims, Christians, Jews, anybody who was into science at the time were being chased out of the monasteries, were being chased out of the scientific institutions, and everything was brought under the auspices of the church. Well, we know what happened after that.
Often hear about the overall level of sophistication of the society. It was clearly the most sophisticated society of the Middle Ages. And rarely do people really enumerate what exactly were the innovations. Does anyone have a comprehensive list of the advancements and the specific? And we'll go to Frank with that. What are some things that they came up with specifically?
Well, from my humble knowledge on this matter, one of the things we often hear when they boast about the Islamic Golden Age is the invention of astrolabe, the numeric system, and the algorithms of Al-Khwarizmi. in math, in mathematics, in that the foundations for chemistry, for much of medicine, were developed during that golden age. That's what most often is circulated within the popular culture here about that era.
Yeah, I've been reading about it recently, and I think that one of the greatest areas where they made a great deal of progress is the notion of patronage and the role of government in society. You had this upstart civilization that had conquered some of the choicest provinces of the Roman Empire, and then essentially all of Persia, and they had a tremendous amount of wealth through the Umayyad and Abbasid periods, and they really, I think, changed the role of what was expected for the government. Other medieval states were, stereotypical feudal states. No real public welfare. Of course, the Greeks and Romans had baths and participatory democracy. But in the caliphate really, and the states as they fractured into these different emirates, they really opened up new doors as far as the government's responsibility in a postal service, public health, doctors available to ordinary people. There was at one point a standardization test that doctors had to take, the first of its kind, wherein you could no longer just be any quack selling vials with mercury. You had to actually demonstrate your knowledge of the best, Greek and Indian medicine that had been adapted, and Persians, of course. So,
yeah.
In a wide variety of ways, they sort of reshaped what people expected the state to do. Now, of course, I have a lot of libertarian and anarchist friends who won't like that, and give them another reason not to like the religion or that civilization. But really, the governments of today probably owe a great deal from this new way of thinking. That is, instead of the Greco-Roman system of patronage, wherein a wealthy citizen built projects individually, monuments, or public baths, or handed out a dole to people who came knocking on his door. The idea of greater infrastructure being provided by the government and greater public works, that was, I think, one of the largest innovations that goes unaccounted for, and I think is much more of much more impact in the long run than an individual mechanical invention or an individual medical discovery even.
Indeed, and as you said, it's not the result of Islam itself. It's rather the result of country of this state with immense wealth and this fusion of different cultures and civilizations like the Persians, the people of the Levant, and other regions, and all the food basket, all the surplus in food and the basic necessities.
You play devil's advocate. What is the argument being made when modern apologists say that it was the religion itself that inspired this development, and some would imply that it wouldn't have happened without Islam?
What, is that a question for everybody or what?
Yeah, I mean, somebody play devil's advocate. What is it that Muslim apologists are claiming is the key driving force? I mean, we've all, I think, who have participated today in this debate, we're all familiar with a quote that is attributed to Muhammad, that the ink of the scholar is more precious than the blood of the martyr. But I've also heard that quote is apocryphal, because I've never encountered it. It's not in the Quran. I don't remember seeing it in the big 6 hadith collections. It might be in one of them. I don't recall. Someone correct me if I'm mistaken. But there's that quote attributed to him, and there's this notion, it seems, among some that alone was the result of the Abbasid era innovations and this flourishing of patronage for the sciences and scholastics. I just don't buy it, because it would be like saying that once upon a time a playwright used the line, "The pen is mightier than the sword," but nobody in their right mind thinks that all literary and scientific achievement that comes after that was a result of that one quote. So I really find that kind of a trite point. But somebody is going to need to play devil's advocate unless we get a Muslim caller, because obviously a great deal of Muslims believe this. They believe that it was the religion itself that caused this age, and this age was unique as a result, standing head and shoulders above the ages of inquiry and exploration that were enjoyed by other civilizations.
Yes, of course. And you can make a very good case for it, because you can very easily say the Quran itself asks its believers, its followers, to go and reflect on reality. Now, if you go and you interpret, because come on, Islam is all about interpretation. So if you interpret this as meaning, you need to be critical with your environment. You need to look at all the faculties, at what nature gives you, and then you need to investigate how everything fits together. Then by all means, Islam and the Quran actually go and instigate this. The only thing is, when are you limited by the Quran? Because if you go and investigate now the natural selection and evolution, then clearly you have a limit there. But if you stay clear of that, then you are quite happily on your way to investigating nature the way that Islam allows and actually encourages it. So yes, for a Muslim, it's very easy to say, it's in the Quran. All we're doing and all they did at the time was to go and further science and further the development of society. Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to have our first caller. It's Jack Hussein. He wants to talk about the Mutazilites. It's taking a while to connect. Jack, you with us?
Hello, yes.
Welcome to the show. What do you have for us? Jack, you with us?
Yes, hi.
Welcome to the show. What do you have for us? You're going to need to mute and minimize your blog TV. You're going to hear everything twice. Just listen to us on Skype. Minimize your blog TV. You're going to hear everything twice.
Can I close it?
Just listen to us on Skype. Yeah, I'd close blog TV altogether and just keep Skype open.
Yes, how are you guys? I've been a fan of your show.
You're on the air now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I just want your topic today is about the Islamic Golden Age, right?
Yes.
So I want to talk about the Mu'tazila.
Okay, great.
Okay. Often Muslims, when they talk about, they say Islam did the great civilization and taught the West about the scientific method and so on and so forth. But they ignore the fact that the Golden Age, the people who brought the Golden Age was the Mu'tazila, or they called the Firaq Kalami. I don't know what's in English, but it's in Arabic, like they say philosophic, they call philosophies. Okay, so the Mu'tazila now they are extinct. They doesn't exist anymore because the mainstream Sunni they took over. So Mu'tazila now they are extinct because their ideas, if they exist today, Sunnis, they may call them like kuffar. They will call them kuffar because they think they're, what I can say, they say
Let me kick it over to Stopper Frank really quick. Now, the caller is absolutely right. The Mutazilites played a key role in the change of mindset away from, the of course, very religious conservative Rashidun. Then you had the Umayyads, who were the party animals, basically, and were, Muawiyah, despite the reputation that he's often vilified by some scholars and historians. He was actually relatively very tolerant of other faiths, but not necessarily a patron of scholastics. Then you have, the Abbasids who come in saying they're going to be a restoration of the Rashidun era orthodoxy. But then you see the rise of the Mutazilites when they gain the favor of, I forget which caliph. Frank or Stop, do you have anything, a brief history of the Mutazilites for us?
Nope.
Can I add something?
Sir?
Because Mu'tazila, they have one like sentence or something. They say al-aql qabl al-naql, or they say the logic before the revelation. The biggest something, the role, the biggest role. They say the al-aql qabl al-naql, or the logic before revelation. So in everything they come to logic. Then if they can't find anything to support their way in logic, then they come to revelation. For example, they cannot find anything in logic for heaven or for hell, so they come to revelation. But for other things which can be solved logically, then they go for logic. That's why they were successful. If they were dumb and they follow revelation, you will be like all the other Muslims. So Muslims, I am from a Muslim country, so I know most Muslims, they say about for example, they will say the scientist from Muslims, he taught the West, he taught everything, but they forget in the history the mainstream Sunni, they call the very scientist, they call him kafir. So how can they be proud of him?
Okay, so anyone have anything to add? Godless Saudi, welcome to the program. Since you showed up, do you have anything to say on the Mu'tazilites, their history, how they came to power, how they fell? Are you with us? Okay. Stopper Frank. Yeah. Okay, Frank, you had something?
Yes. Yeah, well, the Mu'tazilites, they were the first group to say that rationality takes precedence over the scripture itself. And they applied reason to almost every aspect of the Islamic faith. And so they reinterpreted the attributes of Allah, something like anything that is anthropomorphic, they said it's just a metaphor. And they would explain it in other terms. His hand means his will, etc. They also confronted the contradiction between God being all-knowing or omniscient and his omnipotence by saying, and also the contradiction that if God knows everything in advance, that it's absurd of him to test people, and it would mean that people have no free will. And so they said that God is not all-knowing, and therefore he can be all-powerful, and therefore people also have free will. They also have a few other ideas, and as Klingschor said, I heard Klingschor talking about it a few days ago, that probably the reason why they failed is that they imposed it by force and by imprisoning descendants, and therefore making them look like martyrs and make them have more popular support and empathy.
The thing about the Mu'tazilites, for people who are strangers to this chapter in history, is they were a 180-degree departure from everything that had proceeded up until that point. You know, you had these people coming in, and they promoted reason, but they made Ataturk look like a kitten. Ataturk would have his soldiers out on the streets of Turkey tearing the veils off of women and forbidding all kinds of really ancient customs because he wanted to radically secularize his country. Well, they were really more, obviously the Mu'tazilites continued to, they remained within the framework of the religion itself, but they were like if Joseph Stalin had been a Presbyterian. It's a very radical, violent, crackdown once they got the approval of the caliph who was in power at the time, and it was like the Spanish Inquisition in reverse almost, where anyone who was dogmatically against reason could lose property, life, or face imprisonment. So
Yes.
it's like the worst nightmare that every or really every straw man that we hear about what a lot of atheists want to do in religious countries, and maybe what a handful of atheists really would like. Of course, most of us, I think, here would rely on a secular accommodation or compromise. But these guys were the real deal. They were the worst nightmare of the dogmatic theist.
Yeah, but wasn't this also an ideological break? Because weren't they also, because I don't know, everybody knows the Euthyphro's dilemma. They also went against that, and which is what I think Frank was pointing out as well, that they went against this free will thing. So they were questioning basically everything to do with God, but still under the auspices of the Muslim doctrine, which is why the Sunnis hated them.
So, but weren't they still technically part of the Sunnah tradition?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because they still believed in the Quran and Allah, but no, because they questioned everything. They were not, because in the Quran it says in 5101, it says, do not ask questions where the answer will, probably give you a headache. But they did exactly that. So they went against the Quran.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Because as I understand, there was the fight between logic and people who think in revolution. There are some people who think that we don't know anything and we have no choice but to follow the Quran and so on and so forth. And there are the other people who think that logic is the deal. And if we can't come to some conclusion with logic, then we go to revelation. That's the Mu'tazila, they do like that. They say logic and then revelation. Because, for example, they believe in God and they believe in afterlife and everything, but they say we cannot go by logic to this thing, so we can go to revelation. But my point is, Muslims who claim that the civilization, that was a great civilization, it's because of Islam. This is very wrong, because the Mu'tazila, it was very far from what we know, what we now know about Islam. For example, I'll give you an example. For example, they say Quran is not the word of God. Mu'tazila say like that. They say the Quran is a creation by God. They say the Quran cannot be the word of God because it's not very perfect. They say the Quran was created by God, like God created everything, so He created Quran. But the Sunnis say no, God really taught the very word of the Quran. So I think if Mu'tazila now existed, they will be considered as not Muslims because of their ideas.
Godless, do you have any input?
Yeah, this is true. I mean, they weren't considered Muslims, even at their time. For example, if you look at the great scientist and philosopher Al-Farabi, who influenced Avicenna and Ibn Rushd. This guy wasn't even a Mu'tazila. He was just a Muslim who thought that the universe was not created by God. He thought the universe was eternal, along with God. So if you ask any Muslim today, would you consider Al-Farabi a Muslim? When you explain his ideology to him, you would say no, that can't be Muslim if he think that the universe is eternal and not created. And they still call him the Muslim scientist Al-Farabi. And also Ibn Sina is the same case. Ibn Sina do not think that the universe was created by God.
Reminds me of, what was his name? Turing. There was a British mathematician who cracked the Enigma code and, shortened the Second World War by some, it depends on the estimate, but he was a crucial figure in ending that war as soon as it did, because of course you had the German U-boats terrorizing Allied shipping, and he really turned the tables on that, allowing more supplies to reach Europe, which allowed the war to proceed as planned. And because he was a homosexual, they completely threw him under the bus, and he ended up being the discrimination against him was so great, it contributed to his eventual suicide. And I think that in essence, in terms of the the individual thinkers, each and every one of these thinkers of the Golden Age, if they lived today in an area dominated by this sort of very conservative theology, they'd all get lynched. Let's face it. And even
Yes.
Retrospectively, there's a lot of redaction, and these people would quickly be denounced, even though they were the greatest thinkers that the Arab civilization produced, and in some cases that the Persian and Eastern Mediterranean civilizations produced. Anyone else? Jack, do you have anything more before we let you go?
No thanks.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
And thanks for the interesting topic, yeah.
Yeah, take care.
What?
Oh, well, you didn't say goodbye. Okay, so remember, if you want to call into the show and join the panel about this subject or a subject of your choice, just send a Skype contact request to The Gin and Tonic Show, and we will bring you on when we're ready to have guests. Please do not call into the show. Okay, I have a text question from someone who wants to talk about the recent civil unrest in Afghanistan over people finding the burned Qurans. Do we want to talk about that or just stick to the Golden Age stuff?
I'm not aware of this event.
Yeah, apparently some Afghan workers at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan found some burnt Qurans in the garbage. And once news of this got out, there were pretty widespread riots and some people were killed.
But I think this is how you're supposed to get rid of the Quran in Islam. You should burn it first and then you throw it away.
Yes.
No,
So,
you bury it.
So they are just ignorant of Islam, apparently.
Well, but wait, aren't you supposed to destroy it like burn it until there's nothing left?
Yes, but I mean, what if there was a mistake? I mean, the fire went out before it's burned. I
This
mean,
is why I don't
they
think
are
we should talk
being
about this. Is
angry?
political. This is
Yeah.
being abused
Okay,
and used.
I just don't want to feel like people are getting their questions ignored. Okay, so for the record, I brought it up. Anyway, so back to Golden Age stuff. Anyone else have a further comment along those lines?
Well, what I would love to hear is somebody bring up one example of something that was actually invented during that age. Because I hear these, well, the normal absolute claims that this is the beginning of civilization, this is the beginning of everything, and everything that has ever been anything comes from this time. But then when pushed, nobody can really, and documented, find anything that was really, other than this caterpillar water pump. This is really a new invention, but that's the only thing that I could find.
Now, actually, the water pump, if you're talking about the one invented by Jazari, I would recommend anybody look into Jazari's works, because they were really quite fascinating. He was like I think it was Persian by birth, or he was somewhere in Central Asia, a Persian territory. But anyway, he was the Da Vinci of his time and place. He invented all manner of impressive things, and not only that, but he invented these automatons, and these could be considered the first true robotics, because they didn't just operate automatically. I mean, they would be powered by these pumps or by a water wheel or windmill, right? But they didn't just move according to one pattern like the automatons at Chuck E. Cheese. You can actually take this thing like a wooden cog, but shaped like inside a music box. They have the thing that dictates the actual tune that it plays, and it has different bumps and different slots. And you can take one out and put another one into this contraption, and it would change the sequence at which this automaton moved its different parts. So he was far ahead of his time, and a lot of these guys, they wouldn't have been able to accomplish it if it weren't for the right combination of factors that was achieved. Here's the thing: you can be born with a genius IQ or a great deal of creative, intelligence and capacity anywhere. The question, I think, is really whether your society makes use of you. And I remember, people. I hate to bring up anything because it borders on so much melodrama. But I remember when Thunderfoot uploaded a video talking about the total number of papers being published in the Muslim world and how it was appallingly low. And a lot of people were just absolutely furious about, you know, the categorical statement that he thought he was making. But I think, you know, when people make these kinds of observations, it's not just meant to be like a racist affirmation, like, oh, see, these people are all stupid. I think the point is that you could be born with a genius IQ in many places of the developing world, but I think in the Muslim world in particular, where there's this nexus of political and religious conservatism and, you know, often dire poverty. And unless you're born into the few wealthy families that can send you to study overseas, you know, you're going to have notebooks scribbled with all kinds of genius writings, and then that's about it. That'll be the extent to which you can really impact the world around you. So, you know, there's that. I mean, I think that every society has, you know, brilliant people. The question is there the proper system of patronage? Or if anyone ever watched that Simpsons where Homer's brother is homeless, and he says, oh, you know, all you need to make it is an idea. And he says, well, then why are you still a bum, you know, standing in an alley warming your hands by an oil drum? He says, okay, all you need is an idea and money to get it off the ground. I'm going to bring in Atheist Ghost. Okay, and he wants to give, he said he wants to give an overview of the Golden Age. You with us?
Yes, I'm listening.
Thank you. What do you have for us?
Well, I have an overview on this topic. Usually Muslims brag about Golden Age, but I actually, me as being an Arab and Muslims, I don't see anything extra special of what they did. It's, as usual, an empire being built, and new people coming in with their previous knowledge. And as you have noticed, most of the early Muslim scientists, they were actually from those occupied people. So they came up with their knowledge, and bit by bit, Muslims build upon it. The most interesting part is that most people don't realize is, even I can pass a fatwa of current sheikh saying, Muslims discriminate between natural science and actually Sharia law. And now it's very clear. So whenever Muslims praise science, actually they're referring the knowledge of Sharia, not science as me and you or in the Western world would understand it. This is something that had to be very clear. And as Godless Saudi was saying, most of those people that Muslims are extremely proud of, all of them, name me any of those famous Muslim scientists, all of them has been declared whether heretics or wizard or magician. And there are even books written about calling them infidels. So this is one. Second thing is Muslims got really interested in science once they realized it can make them money or it actually can bring them power. There is a famous story about learning how to build cutter bullets after Muslims failing and conquering Byzantine, and then they got interested in asking other nations to help them how to build cutter bullets. This is a famous story when the demand actually arose the need to learn about this stuff. And if you notice, most of those efforts were individually, scientists themselves. I have never seen a Khalifa had an R&D budget except for translating in the early beginning. A simple case that nothing else is mentioned about it. Few cases in Egypt in having national hospitals and the translation school in Baghdad. But how much was that compared to the budget of having new concubine and harem for the Khalifa? I have never seen this. I have never seen a university where people really had an R&D. It's always individual efforts, and it usually, like example that you just mentioned, for example, learning how to do mechanics. I have actually books written about accusing these people of using magics and jinnis because they simply fail to understand that this is mechanics. I will end this topic. I mean, I will end this by saying that actually the collapse of what they call the Golden Age came when sheikhs got involved in science and they kept saying everything is haram. I mean, all of you must know about the fact that Muslims, or let's say Arab or Muslim civilization collapsed once a guy just came out of the vein, Ghazali, and said, math is haram, math is forbidden, math is actually non-useful knowledge. And that's it. So actually, the science revolution collapsed because of Islam, and it did not start because of Islam. So actually, the death certificate was given by sheikhs. Thank you.
I have a question before you go. I understand, you know, of course, a lot of us, when we first came across internet religious debate, you know, the first wave of resistance was by anti-science creationists or pseudoscience creationists, whatever you want to call them. And I at least understand the issue that they take. Their scripture says X, the earth and life sciences say Y. They, you know, unlike the Mutazilites, they side with their scriptures as being literal, whereas other people, like the Mutazilites, you know, they keep the religion on a nominal basis, but they compromise the scripture and say, well, maybe that's not really what it means. But what was Ghazali's problem with math?
No, can I comment on that? I mean, Al-Ghazali has...
Yeah, go on.
He divided math and philosophy and alchemy to like 4 different sects of knowledge or whatever, and he prohibited like 2 and then allowed 2. So he thinks that if it's demonstrably beneficial to Muslims, then it's okay to study. If you can't demonstrate that this philosophy or this kind of math is actually beneficial to Muslims, then it's haram.
So was he against more abstract form of math, like the early calculus, or?
Yes.
So did he call out Khwarizmi by name and what he wrote?
I'm not sure, but he hated philosophy. That's for sure. And philosophy in his when he described it, it includes math.
Well, there is something also to add in here, which is usually because clergymen are not really good scientists, so sometimes, for example, they will fail to discriminate between chemistry and wizard descriptions, between astrology and monitoring, between astrology for checking your luck and reading your future, and astrology of monitoring the stars and the planets. So they will just call it all haram, all forbidden.
Yeah, because astronomy was a big thing almost throughout the Muslim civilization, but you say Ghazali cracked down on it, or Ghazali's adherents cracked down on it?
Ghazali said math in general is haram. So early forms of mathematics, I mean, early form of calculus and dealing with numbers was... Because the funny thing is, if you look at how Arabs used to do magic, they used to draw tables with number in it. So once he looked on any mathematical formula, for him it looked like magic. So that's why it was haram. He didn't understand what this looks like, what this does. So he thought literally it looks like magic for him. So magic was haram. I mean, math was haram, forbidden.
So it's more
So
a case
even-
of personal
even
ignorance.
I'm sorry, even simple arithmetic.
Actually, I remember he said tables of that looks like magic. So that's why that was his main excuse.
So, okay.
Not simple arithmetics. I mean, an advanced topic.
Okay, so you could add 7-digit numbers, and he didn't. It wasn't carrying the one that bothered him. It was variable substitution and sines and cosines. I mean, you were talking about You're talking about things that original contributions. When you sit down in a calculus class and you look at all of the sine and cosines,
Exactly.
many of the many of the core ones that are most commonly used were part of the original contributions made by Arabo-Persian thinkers. But you know, this reminds me of this goofy story when the Arabs were first taking over these wealthier civilizations, and despite the fact that with their light cavalry they were very mobile and very fierce fighters, you know, they were routinely beating most of the Byzantine and Persian infantry-based units, and just, you know, much like, you know, the Central Asian people, the success that they achieved, you know, their light cavalry just dominated. So they're taking over all of these wealthy provinces of these two empires. Yes, we're live, Kling. And they're taking over all these wealthy areas, and at one point, this Arab warrior takes this prisoner and then ransoms or sells them off for 10,000 silver dirhams. And someone tells him, "You idiot! That was the person you captured was royalty. You could have gotten so much more for them. They were a noble. Their family would have paid you so much more." And he said, "I didn't know that there was a number higher than 10,000."
Yeah, but this is the whole point. Isn't this the guy that also said, he looked at some formula which somebody was trying to explain to him, and he says, what value is this for Allah? because he was trying to put everything into context with his religion. He didn't see anything else than that, so he saw no value outside of religion.
Yes, if Al-Ghazali really liked medicine because it could, I mean, it could be beneficial for Muslims. So he thought that medicine is okay. It's not prohibited. I mean, you can study medicine.
So, Klingschor, welcome to the program. Oh, by the way, Atheist Ghost, do you have anything more before we let you go?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for coming on. Shukran. Welcome to the program, Sleepyhead. What do you have for us?
It wasn't. I didn't fall asleep. I was awake on time.
Here's a trivia question: Which famous Muslim invented the alarm clock?
That's a trick question. All right. I do apologize for being late. I tried to connect on the internet and it didn't work.
It's fine. So anyway, this is your day. This is the one that you were excited about. So we've already talked about the Mutazilites. We've already talked about Al-Jazari and Khwarizmi. We've already talked about Al-Ghazali. We haven't left anything for you. So good job.
Okay. Well, maybe you have. Have you actually underlined and stressed the actual claim that is entailed within the Golden Age assertion?
I brought that up early and everyone just drew a blank. But yeah, I think it's important that the counter-argument, well actually ours is the counter-argument, that the argument that this was a religious revival that resulted in science, I think that could be explored more, certainly.
Well, okay, let me read you a quote here which will help really underscore what the claim is. And this quote is actually taken from, well, I've actually deliberately misquoted it in that originally it was referring to Christians and the Bible. I've changed it all to relevant Islamic terminology. And this should give you an idea of the claim that is being made everywhere by Muslim apologists. And the claim is this, quote, "As a new generation of historians, sociologists and philosophers of science has proven, Islamic religion was not the enemy of science, but rather the intellectual matrix which made it possible in the first place. Without the key insights that Islam found celebrated in the Quran and spread throughout the Middle East, science would never have happened. The evidence is incontrovertible. It was the rational theology of both the Abbasid Caliphate and Umayyad al-Andalus, inspired by the explicit and implicit truths found revealed in the Holy Quran, that led to the discoveries of modern science." So basically the idea is that Islam happened and resulted in this massive, glorious golden age of science and wonder in the Middle East for a few hundred years. And this simply isn't the case. I mean, when did Muhammad first receive his revelation?
Yeah, I agree. Right off the bat, the anachronism is obvious because you have what in the middle of it's in like the 10th century that you have people like Al-Mamun and Al-Rashid, kicking off this great patronage of scholastics, but obviously Islam had been around a while before.
Well, I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, if we begin with the date of the first revelation, and the beginning of his career, this happened in approximately 610 CE. But the Golden Age, if we call it a Golden Age, began approximately, well, with the rise of the Abbasids, so in 750 CE. That's a long time in between. So the obvious question is, well, why didn't the science start earlier? What about the Umayyads? Why was there why was there virtually no Muslim contribution to science for more than a century under the Umayyads?
They were all drunk.
Well,
no, it's true.
That's one explanation.
Yeah, they said about Yazid III. This is what a lot of people I think don't know, and because I've come across quotes from Hamzat Sortsis and a wide variety of other of the kookier apologists, and they say, well, everything will be all right when we bring back the caliphate. And I'm like, well, it really depends on which caliph you draw from the bag without looking, because I think it was Yazid III. They said that he would go swimming in a little pool of wine, and by the time he was done swimming, the level had dropped significantly from all that he had drank. Now, a lot of those stories are probably, at least somewhat fictitious, but, the Umayyads were famous drinkers, starting with, I think, Yazid I or something like. Anyway, but yeah, a lot throughout, the prohibition in the Muslim civilization at the time was about as effective as prohibition in the U.S. in the early part of the 20th century. Everybody was getting plastered.
Yeah, but this is the whole point. We need to balance reality and the claims. We need to look at what it is that people realistically are saying, why they are saying it, how they're saying it, how do they back it up, what is reality out of this, and then what of this is true today, demonstrably true, and what is actually of any benefit to us today. Because if you see reality, come on, how many of these guys get plastered every weekend on their way going up to Bahrain and that, and then die on the way down because they're so drunk? I mean, that is reality. That is something that you need to take into consideration. It's reality. You can't just always sit with the head in the clouds and say, well, everything's nice and beautiful, it's all religious. It's not.
I don't know if that's oh, sorry. I don't know if that's germane to the issue of science.
It is. It is, because this is the claim. This has nothing to do with reality. What people are saying to me is, well, there is this Muslim golden age. The Quran tells us to do everything to look at reality. This is what they did. And so the Quran was the one who drove science in the 12th century. And this is why we have science today. This is why we have mathematics. This is why we have aerodynamics. This is why we have medicine. This is why we have anatomy. This is what people are telling me. And I look at this and then I compare it to reality. I look at the text and I see, no, it's not true.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean. And the thing is that this is all tied in with this whole, well, this Islamist revival movement, wherein they say, look what kind of society Sharia creates. Let's bring it back, and we'll have that again. It's this whole caliphate revival kind of movement tied in with this whole Golden Age claim. So I guess if we can debunk this Golden Age myth, it will actually go some way to undermining this philosophy, this idea that we should, embrace these principles and have them underpin our civilization. So then the question is, okay, how did the Golden Age of, I would say, Arabic science begin? And the reason why I call it Arabic science is because the lingua franca of science in the medieval Middle East was Arabic in this period. All the scientists, whether they were Persian, whether they were Turkish, whether they were Moorish, whatever, they all spoke Arabic and they wrote in Arabic. So just as Greek was once the language of science in previous centuries. So the question is, when and how did this Golden Age begin? Well, I mean, that's a rhetorical question, because I know exactly when it began. But would you guys like to
Go for it.
Give some, okay. All right.
المأمون خلافات.
Nope, it actually begins a little bit earlier than that. Essentially what happened was, a little bit of history for those who don't know, the first proper dynasty to rule the Arab Muslim Empire was the Umayyads. But in 750 CE, they were overthrown by the Abbasids. Now, the Umayyads were generally, although towards the end this was beginning to slip, but generally they were Arab-centric elitists, whereas the Abbasids were very much more universalist. They said anyone can be a Muslim. They were heavily influenced by the Persians and supported by the Persians. And when they took over the Arab Muslim Empire, they moved the capital from the old Umayyad metropole of Damascus to Mesopotamia, where they built a new capital, Baghdad. And in this process, they, having moved from mostly Greek-speaking Levant to a Persian-speaking region, they began to translate Persian administrative texts to help in the smooth running of the empire. And the Umayyads had done this previously many times, translating Greek and Persian administrative texts. But this time, something was different, and that is that paper had been invented from Central Asia, from China. Originally, paper had come down into the Middle East, and so when they were translating these administrative texts, the Abbasids were able to do so much more efficiently and disseminate them much more widespread. So now knowledge was more available for everyone and easier to copy, easier to in transmission. But this itself did not lead to the science. What led to the science was the early Abbasid fascination with Persian culture, particularly astrology. That's right, astrology, not astronomy, astrology. And what happened was that the Caliph al-Mansur, who was the second Abbasid ruler, and it's possible he was doing this just to get in bed with the Persian aristocrats who had helped him get to power, but he was very much got into astrology, and it became a very popular thing. And there was this big Persian cultural revival and this big interest in astrology. And so, whilst they were translating administrative texts, they began to translate astrological texts as well into Arabic for use for the Arab aristocrats and so forth. And then as they were translating the astrological texts, they began to also translate astronomical texts as well, because it sparked their interest, and then mathematical texts, and then medicine, and then philosophy, and it blossomed from there. And this is actually what led to the golden age of Arabic science. It was the Abbasid transition to Baghdad, the subsequent translation movement of ministerial texts, coupled with the ease of translation brought about by paper, and then coupled by the most important point, which is the fascination and revival interest in astrology. And this is what led to the golden age of Arabic science.
Saying earlier, a lot, Stop was asking which specific innovations were brought up, and I still maintain what I said at the beginning of the show, is that the institutional innovations were the greatest leap forward, especially with not just the practice of patronizing the House of Learning in Baghdad, or the House of Wisdom, excuse me, but the network that they set up. Because remember, they had taken chunks off of all of these different civilizations. Of course, they had dominated much of what was Byzantine territory before. They had all of North Africa, they had all of Persia, they had Boardwalk and Park Place, and still were gathering in chunks of India, Central Asia, even parts of Western China. And they took all of the best of what these different civilizations had to offer, brought it all to the center, the Eye of the Storm, which is the House of Wisdom, translated it all into a lingua franca that all of the scholars of the empire were learning, and then distributed it. So when you have this ready access to information, it was like a very, very low-tech sort of steampunk version of the internet. And I think that is maybe the single fulcrum upon which it all turned, was this emphasis on literacy and the efficient distribution of information to anybody who wanted it. When you have a higher level of overall literacy and a higher emphasis on education in the population as a whole, then of course you're going to. How can you experience? How can you not experience some positive results with that? But this assertion that modern Muslim apologists will make, that a greater degree of piety on the behalf of the individual or the society is going to beget greater scientific inquiry. I think that they would do themselves a favor by really looking at, the ups and downs that scientific inquiry has taken in the Muslim civilization and in others, as the dial between concentration on theology to the exclusion of other subjects, to a diversion, that is theology being a separate subject and other sciences being distinct, and other art and literature being distinct from religion, and the results that you get from that. I mean, it's like if we were to go on Muslim Jeopardy. If you go on normal Jeopardy, you have art, literature, history, music, science, and so forth. But in the minds of the Al-Ghazali types, and even of the early caliphs and Muhammad himself, it's Islam, theology, Islamic philosophy, Islamic science, and it's just such a poisonous attitude. Anyway, someone else.
Yes, I'd like to say something, that the Islam of that time would be, most people who lived in Baghdad in the Abbasid era would be perhaps jailed or lynched today in today's Islamic society. And actually many of the, especially from the Muslim Brotherhood, they often claim that the reason behind the Golden Age, as you mentioned, is a Islamic Sharia. However, if you look at that area, there were almost no taboos except the criticism of the caliphate. There was the freedom to blaspheme, there was free inquiry, there was a lot of hedonism, and those areas, of course, were interrupted frequently. But generally, if you look at that Golden Age, it was the prominent of that area. And if you even look at the Umayyad Andalus or Baghdad of that time, there were bars around the city, as you mentioned, the prohibition. They were one of the famous bars where intellectuals would meet is Hanatu Sam'an, that is owned and run by a Christian. And also in Umayyad Andalus, one of the caliphs there, Al-Hakam al-Thalith, Al-Hakam ibn al-Mustansar, Al-Hakam the third, he actually had a harem that was exclusively male. He was gay, and when they insisted that he should marry and produce an heir, he actually had a woman dressed up like a boy so he can have sex with her.
This was one of the caliphs?
One of the caliphs of Umayyad Andalus. He was a caliph of Cordoba. His name is Al-Hakam ibn al-Mustansar, Al-Hakam the third. But so if you look at it this way, there was the Sharia at that time. The way of government was fundamentally different from the Sharia that even the Muslim Brotherhood would call for.
I'm sorry.
And,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but this all goes back to people like Hamza wanting to revive the caliphate, and me thinking it really these people obviously don't know the history of the caliphate, because it really depends on who they get. If they were to get Hakam III, it just the jokes about the fabulous, cue the lispy stereotype homosexual voice, the fabulous caliphate that Sortsies is going to support. Sorry, I just completely derailed your chain of thought for something stupid, but I had to say it.
Well, the IERA are fond of those big, bright rainbow colors. There might be something to that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be hilarious if they got the caliphate back and it was a gay caliph with an all-male harem. Sorry. Okay. I hope you didn't lose your complete train. That was rude of me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's just a funny story that happened just today in Riyadh. We had this massive sandstorm, and all of a sudden it was 4 in the afternoon. All of a sudden the whole city turned dark because of this sand. It was 50 kilometers wind, and the social networking, the BlackBerry is a viral way of communicating here. So it was all about this being God's revenge for what happened at a festival in Riyadh where there was mingling of the sexes and where there was some music and a little bit of dancing. And that shows you the way Muslims think today, even while they're using this technology to spread this information, which is very unfortunate.
If you don't mind me building on something you just said, something I think a lot of people don't realize is that once upon a time, in keeping with some Quranic verses and hadiths, all music and singing of a non-religious nature was just as forbidden as alcohol. Is that accurate as far as Kling and Godless knows?
Yes, that's in the hadith, yeah.
Well, I can tell you that in opposition to the Mu'tazila of the Abbasids, there arose the Hanbalis, who were these angry traditionalist popularists who actually had many riots in Baghdad and would systematically destroy instruments.
So the answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
And then weren't the Kharijites also very? I mean, they were active since the very beginning. Since they broke off, that movement was born out of Ali's disgruntled soldiers, right?
Yes, but that was always a fringe thing.
Right,
the
but
Kharijis never gained really any power, although they did take over large sections of Arabia at one point.
yeah, oh, well, just that. But the Kharijites, they were kind of well, maybe worse than Taliban, maybe even the Al-Qaeda of their day, or the Boko Haram of their day, is they would stage a lot of assassinations of people who were just not following what they thought God's law were. So you'd have a nominal prohibition against music, but you'd still have music and you'd still have famous musicians, and then he'd get his throat cut by a Kharijite in the middle of the night. So this stuff has been going on a while, and there's from the very beginning there's been the extreme and progressive schools. So I was gonna have another guest, but it looks like he's busy. So go ahead, whoever wants to take up the talkie stick now.
Okay, then let it be me, because in the last couple of days I've been speaking to a professor in Pakistan who wrote an essay about this, who said that there's nothing further apart than two people that read the Quran, because he made the point that two people can be reading somebody like Sheikh Mohammed of Dubai and somebody in the Taliban, and they are completely opposed. And when it comes to their values, when it comes to their education, when it comes to their moral, whatever you take, they are totally separate. And he made the point that Muslims in the last 900 years have not contributed anything of scientific value up until, well, now, this era now. And because he's somebody that has been working with Abdul Salam, who's the Nobel Prize laureate, who was declared non-Muslim and left Pakistan and went to London. But anyway, this professor that I've been talking to, he says it is such a pity that Muslims today are still tacit. They will take notes, but they will not challenge, because they are not brought up to do that kind of a thing. It is not considered polite. It is not considered to be Muslim or Islamic to go and challenge somebody who is your elder, your father, your grandfather, or anything like this. It is not in the educational principle.
Well, this instance of someone winning a Nobel Prize and then having to flee, and then of course there was this case in London where there was an imam who openly said that he thought that evolution was could be congruent with Islamic doctrine, and then he apparently is no longer teaching and received a great deal of threats. I mean, nobody, I think, well, nobody here is going to make the argument that out of this 1 billion people, nobody is being born with a mind gifted enough that they could contribute. But if they're going to get lynched on the eve of their contribution, what difference is it going to make?
Yeah, and what we've had is, this is not from the Golden Age necessarily, but now if we look at today, if people are leaving the lectures at the university when they're in the biology classes, they start teaching evolution. And they say, sorry, biology, yes, anatomy, yes, evolution, sorry, no, I don't want to hear this.
Okay, so what ended the Golden Age? What slowed it down? What were the contributing factors? Was there one overall cause?
It was the church. It was the Catholic Church. When Friedrich died, who was he was the emperor all the way. He was multiple emperor from Germany all the way to Italy. He was emperor of 5 different states, and he was very science-centric. And when he died, his protective hand was withdrawn, and the church took over. And because they were simply jealous, they did not want to have science that was going against the doctrine of the church.
Well, wait.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, why? You brought this up before. Why is I think the Holy Roman Emperor? Why does he play such a key role? I mean, you're talking about more of a golden age straddling the Muslim and Christian worlds, yeah?
No. What happened is that the church did not really like anything being investigated that they thought belonged into the realm of the church. Mm-hmm. And what Friedrich said is, listen, you guys, shut up. This is science. You are out of it. But then when he died, he could not do that any longer. And then the church took over, they took control, and they took all the stuff away.
Right.
That accounts Europe,
yeah,
and Christian Europe, but that doesn't account...
That was a trigger. That was the question. What triggered it? This was the trigger.
Ah, okay, I see. I would posit different aspects and factors for the decline of science in the Middle East, and there are several. Before I get into that, I want to actually address two things. First of all, this idea that it's a golden age, singular, and secondly, the idea of science. But I might say the science until last, because this might be a great surprise for everyone, so I'll keep that to last. But see, this straw man that there was a golden age is wrong. We had the golden age of the Abbasids, and then we have the silver age of the Abbasids, where the empire basically collapses and is taken over by Turkish sultans and so forth, and emirs. And so we've got many minor states fighting each other. And I mean, Baghdad wasn't the only center. It was one of many throughout the Arab Muslim Empire. It was the first, it was the major one, but there were many others. And even when Baghdad was extinguished, the others lived on. However, in the Silver Age, when the centralization of the empire had collapsed and local dynasties were running amok, it was very difficult for scientists. I mean, scientists would be, because as you mentioned the patronage before of the state, this became very perilous because a king or a local king would support scientists. When the local king was overturned by a rival, all his court officials and everyone associated with him would be killed, including the scientists. So scientists were basically constantly on the run. I mean, a famous one, Umar Khayyam.
Umar al-Khayyam.
There we go. Well, he was lucky when his patron, which is the Sultan Malik Shah, and his other protector, which was Nizam al-Mulk, when they were assassinated, his punishment was to be forced to go on the Hajj to Mecca. So he got off quite lightly. Often scientists would just be killed. But even as Al-Andalus was, even as the Abbasids were collapsing, we have Al-Andalus to the west, and this is Muslim Spain. What happened there was, and so again, we have another golden age. So it isn't a single golden age. We have rises and falls, because as the Abbasids are falling in one region, in Al-Andalus they were flourishing. And so we have, and what happened was when the Umayyad princes fled and established their empire in Spain, they began to copy the Abbasids, and basically just began to wholesale export Abbasid culture and musicians and architecture and everything. And then they began to develop their own science, and that began to flourish. But again, it was the same situation. Within a short amount of time, the centralization of the empire collapsed, and you had many warring factions. And then you have the fanatical Berbers invading, who were religious fundamentalists, who were forcing Christians and Jews to convert to Islam and all these kinds of nonsense, this kind of Inquisition atmosphere. And then, of course, the Christians are coming in from the north. But meanwhile, in Egypt, again, we have, whilst the Abbasids are falling and Al-Andalus has all these problems, in Egypt we have the Fatimids, who were Ismailis. And they rose, and they established the city of Cairo, where they again had great science. But then this state collapsed, and Salah al-Din, that's Saladin from the Crusades, from all the movies, took over, and the science just ended. He invested nothing in the science. Apparently he sold the library. And so again and again we have rising and falling. There was no single golden age. And note something curious. Which Islam is it? Is it the Mu'tazila of the Abbasids, and the rationalists of Al-Andalus, or the Ismailis of Egypt? Like these are by today's standards, these are all heretical and deviant sects of Islam. Yeah, these are the sects under which the science briefly flourished. And I say, for a few hundred years, flourished. So this idea that Islam caused this, and these are heretic sects and blasphemers and so forth, it is just quite funny. And so then there was one final flourishing, and that is in Central Asia. And so this brings us to what you were talking about, what ended the Golden Age. Because it is often posited that the Mongols ended the Golden Age. And basically what happened was when Genghis Khan and the Mongols spread out across the world, when they invaded Baghdad, they completely and utterly destroyed the city. Does anyone want to give the lowdown of what happened when they entered Baghdad?
Well, I talked about this on the last show. I said that Ulago killed so many people in the city that he himself couldn't stand the stench of all the corpses that he had created. And so he didn't spend the night in the city. He just retreated back to his camp because so many people were dead.
Yeah, I mean, that they completely destroyed the great libraries. They threw all the books into the river. I'm not sure if it was the Euphrates or not.
I think Baghdad was at the time primarily on the Tigris.
Ah, thank you. And so it was massive carnage. But this did not actually end the Golden Age. In fact, under how do you say his name? Ulago
or Hulago.
Ulago.
Yeah.
You'll have to forgive my horrible pronunciations. Under Ulago's rule and his successors in the Mongol Persian Empire and subsequently in the Turco-Mongol Khanates, well, in the Timurid Khanate, precisely, science flourished. Particularly, Arabic astrology reached its peak under the Turks and the Mongols after the destruction of Baghdad. So the Mongols and the Turks they certainly destroyed Baghdad. But they did not end the science. The science ended independently.
I'd like to include one quick comment. I should say that the only reason, according to available sources, that astronomy was able to survive is because I think it was Al-Tusi managed to petition the Mongol leadership for permission to continue his work into astrology, that is for prediction purposes, but basically on the sly, he was studying the hard science of astronomy while getting, paying the bills by giving the Turkic and Mongol leaders, their horoscopes basically, and getting paid for that. But yeah, it was only because the Mongol religious belief system placed such a heavy emphasis on the power of astrology as they saw it. So again, much like with Ghazali, only those that survived this religious scrutiny, this religious litmus test, those were the only subjects that were allowed to survive. So again, the Muslims in that region primarily converted to Islam or Christianity over time, eventually almost all of them to Islam. So again, you have the tug of war between religion and secular science. When religion has the state power, it pulls science into the mud every time.
Actually, it's interesting because even in the Middle Ages, Muslims referred to science. I mean, they made a distinction. They called science, and I'm going to mispronounce this horribly, ulum el-awal or ulum el-khudrama, or el-ulum el-qadama. Qadima, rather. Basically, they actually specified that science was the sciences of the ancients, or ancient sciences. So that they actually stressed the pre-Islamic origins of science, as opposed to ulum el-din, which is, of course, religious sciences.
When they're saying science of the ancients, are they referring primarily to the Grecian tradition, you think?
Yes. The natural sciences, yeah.
Yeah, because someone sent me a comment on the side saying, well, did they adapt these innovations from Greeks, or did they get them from the Quran? If it's the first answer, why don't they say Zeus Akbar?
Yeah, I mean, many Muslim, they call them Muslim scientists, they always embrace Aristotle and Galen, because that's, most of their work is just a commentary of the Greek science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an observation that's inevitably needs to be made, and this is, I think, what irritates me about people like these apologists who say, well, all the important discoveries were made by Muslims, and it puts you in this unfortunate position of having to correct them, and you might be perceived as downplaying the achievements of that civilization, which is something I certainly don't want to do. But you know, it's so irritating when, you know, admittedly, the modern Western world doesn't give enough credit to the Middle East for its being this important link in the chain. But then, of course, it's a very hypocritical accusation when you know, a Muslim apologist says that, and they give absolutely no credit whatsoever to the previous civilizations that did so much. I mean, you know, for example, the Quran calls the pagan Semites a people without knowledge on a couple of occasions. And I thought, these are the people without knowledge? I mean, pagan Semites laid the foundation for just about everything. I mean, the Phoenicians made the writing system off of which, you know, Latin, Cyrillic, Greek, the Arabic script and all of its variants. Even there's a script in Mongolia that's based, you know, through a long chain of writing systems off of Phoenician, Tibetan, the Indian subcontinents, the writing systems of in the Abugidas of Southeast Asia. All of these writing systems come from the Phoenician writing system that had been adapted from Egyptian. These are all pagan Semites. And the Quran, written by an illiterate man, has the nerve to call these people a people without knowledge. You know, they have no respect, it seems, modern apologists. I mean, certainly the thinkers of the Middle Ages and of the Middle East, they had the utmost of respect for the people who came before. But modern apologists, you don't hear a word out of them. They do everything to downplay, especially like Hamza with this nonsense about, oh, well, there's no possible way that Greek science could have made it to Arabia, which of course is absurd to anyone who's ever read the history at all. But yeah, it's such a hypocritical thing for them to give no credit whatsoever to the people who came before.
Okay, so what is realistic then? Where do we go? Because there's a video with Patrick Stewart which says, okay, the Muslims, or Arabs or whatever, laid the foundation for a lot of the things that we have today, which is 100% true. But now, how do you define what is truth and what is wishful thinking?
Historical sources. I mean, I have here a stack of books devoted to the subject of medieval Arabic science, which talk about all these kinds of things. I mean, for example, chemistry. Chemistry was very much established properly by Arabic scientists. So, absolutely, chemistry, yes. But in medicine, for example, although, you know, Ibn Sina and so forth made many great contributions, basically the works of Galen were always the greatest authority. Everything was based on the works of Galen. Whenever a scientist wanted to prove something, he would invariably refer to Galen and use Galen's authority for something. I mean, sometimes there were doubts raised. For example, there was a book written by, let's see now. There was a book written by, El-Razi, actually. He wrote a book called The Book of Doubts About Galen. But this kind of thinking was, how we say, minority. The mainstream consensus of the Arabic scientists was that, you know, well, the massive foundation upon which all of their work was based was the works of Galen and Hellenic scientists and doctors and physicians. So,
okay, but if somebody asks me and says, okay, well, what is it? I cannot give them the answer that you just gave because it means, you know, reading 100 books. Is there any easy way of defining what it is that is useful and something that is obviously still available today that definitely has its base in that time 900 years ago? Or do we have to go on a case-by-case basis?
Yes, for example, if you look at the work of Jabir bin Hayyan, he invented distillation of alcohol, and he discovered sulfuric acid and nitric acid. And yes, some scholars claim that those acids were invented in Italy before Jabir bin Hayyan, but I mean, you just have to pick. I mean, I think they were invented at the same time.
So it is very much a case that you have to go and actually what Kling was just doing, saying, all right, you have to investigate each case individually and go and establish and verify and look at the text, what is what for each individual claim. Is that, am I understanding this right?
Here's a quick question from the chat on something a bit unrelated. Do Sunna and Shia in the modern day both use the Cairo edition of the Quran?
Yes, they do.
It's the same. So. I mean, it's Quran is printed in Saudi Arabia too, but it's exactly the same as the one in Cairo.
Okay,
It's the 1918 edition.
but if we go to Tehran, we'll find it in Arabic, matching the Cairo edition word for word.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's. But we'll save the other editions in history of the Quran for another episode. We just wanted to clear that up because someone had that question. So, what did I interrupt? Go back to it, whatever it was.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to get into this whole thing of how did it end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Stopspamming suggested a European monarch, but I wouldn't. I mean, this maybe have caused some kind of chain effect, but I would cite a number of different aspects. Sorry, Frank, what were you going to say something?
Yes. Do you guys mind if I share with you some excerpts from an essay that might be relevant to the end of the Golden Age?
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's written by a Wahhabist sheikh whose name is Nasser Al-Fahad. He is contemporary, and he's a Saudi, and he cites heavily Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, as you know, was born 8 years after the fall of Baghdad to Hulagu in 1263, and he's highly influential on current Sunni thought and aqidah. And also, according to Wikipedia, among his notable ideas are inductive logic, analogical reasoning, and critique of syllogism. Anyways, the essay is titled "The Truth About Islamic Civilization," and in his introduction, he says that this essay is the answer to those who have reduced Islamic civilization to the genius of philosophers and atheists, and reduced it to building of buildings and architecture, and so on. So, and he also calls it a result of a fitna of that time. And then he also asserts that the true Islamic civilization is that which was during the first 3 centuries after the Hijrah. And says that after those 3 centuries, the Muslims have been reverting constantly, and that they're weakening, and so on. Anyways, he gathers together a list of some of the sciences and some of the famous scientists of the area. So about philosophy, he says it's the spring of heresy and the mine of lies. Okay, chemistry, he says, is man trying to imitate God, and these are all from Ibn Taymiyyah. This one is from Ibn Taymiyyah also. And then for astrology, astronomy, he says there are 2 kinds. Astrology is, of course, forbidden, but astronomy is okay, so people can know how to know the Qibla, know how to pray towards Mecca, and to guide themselves for jihad. Architecture is not, and then about architecture, he says it has nothing of Islam. And he quotes Al-Bukhari, a hadith that says that a Muslim should not work in architecture, the meaning of it. And then he goes on, he prepares a list. I just picked some of them, the more famous ones. Jabir ibn Hayyan, who was a chemist, I gather, or he yes, doesn't actually...
Chemist.
Yes.
He's from Shia Islam, by the way.
The first major chemist.
Okay, he says that his existence is dubious, the writer, about, and then also he cites Ibn Taymiyyah saying that it isn't sure if he existed, and that his alchemy was sorcery or something of the sort. Al-Khwarizmi, they say he was an astrologer and therefore an infidel. And then Al-Jahiz, who is also said to have some ideas that are somewhat related to evolution. Yes, he says that he was of monstrous face and terrible reputation, and he didn't pray, and therefore was a zindiq, an apostate or an atheist. Al-Kindi, Yaqub ibn Ishaq Al-Kindi, also they say is a philosopher and therefore a liar. Thabit ibn Qarra, an infidel, a philosopher, an atheist. Al-Razi, Muhammad ibn Zakaria Al-Razi, the doctor, he says is one of the leaders of heretics and atheists. Al-Farabi, the philosopher, he says he's the most staunch in his atheism and denial.
Yes, this guy who said that the universe was eternal and not created.
Yes, and then Avicenna, Ibn Sina, he calls him the Imam of the atheists. And he says he's from the Qaramita al-Batiniya, and he says he was also, he and his father were heralds for Ismailiyats. Ibn al-Haytham, he was a pioneer of optics, yeah, and they also say he invented the camera obscura. He also says he's an atheist apostate. Al-Idrisi, the fellow who drew this wonderful map of the old world with excellent accuracy, he says he was a servant to the Christian king of Sicily, and there is nothing that can make him more of an apostate. Ibn Tufayl, Ibn Rushd Averroes, also an atheist. That's what the essay writer says. Asaim of At-Tusi, he says he's the helper of the infidels, polytheists and atheists. And so to the fellow whose birthday was yesterday, celebrated on Google, the Voyager Ibn Battuta, he says he was a Sufist, grave worshipper, superstitious, and a liar. So this is about these are the things I picked from the list. So probably these I like Salafists because they are truer to their texts than say the Muslim Brotherhood, and they have somewhat more integrity with what they believe and what they say, and his sources are also mostly reliable. He uses Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, Ibn Taymiyyah, history books, At-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, all of good isnad. So this gives you an idea of the thought that that became prominent after Ibn Taymiyyah and is most influential today in the Muslim world.
What Frank was reading made me think of this. I had to read that. Then I have another guest who wants to talk about the Muslim Age of Inquiry versus the Greek Age of Inquiry. But this is a epistle written by Ibn al-Khatib. He was a Spanish Muslim who, in the middle of the 14th century, when the Black Death was wiping out most of Europe, he wrote this. He says, "To those who say, how can we admit the possibility of infection while religious law denies it? We reply that the existence of contagion is established by experience, investigation, the evidence of the senses, and trustworthy reports. These facts constitute a sound argument. If the fact of contagion becomes clear to the investigator who notices how he who establishes contact with the afflicted gets the disease, whereas he who is not in contact remains safe, and how transmission is affected through garments, vessels, and earrings." If this guy, now in the first line of his letter, he says, the religious law says infectious disease is a no-go because there's spiritual forces at work and you're not supposed to look into that. But he says, look, he's just so far ahead of everyone else in this era as far as understanding the germ theory of disease and how it works. And even though he doesn't have powerful enough microscopes to, look at a bacteria or bacilli, in a laboratory, through simple observational methods and, the same methods that scientists use today, he's able to understand how it transmits. And he could have, saved countless lives had he had more elbow room in which to work. He spells it all right here. He says, look, we know from deduction and observation and empiricism how this works, and we can, take steps to stop it. So imagine if, every other society is dying of the plague and they had been early adapters to things like either vaccines or at least, if not vaccines, you know, sterilization, you know, protective masks, protective gloves, better protection of food and water sources, you know, or just good, what do you call it?
Hygiene.
Efficient quarantines as well. You know, if you could just quarantine the people who were showing symptoms of disease and drastically slow its spread, they would have been well on their way towards, you know, the polio vaccine type revolution in combating infectious disease. But he says right here, his letter is directed right at his opponents who are in the religious camp who say, no, it's not germs, it's spirits. Stop looking into this. So I'm going to bring in a new caller.
But
that's a
before,
good
before we,
example.
So I'm going to bring in a new caller. He goes by the name One Species, and he wants to talk about Islamic science and Greek science. Or
can I quickly make a quick comment
yes, please.
Before we have the caller? Just with what Frank was saying, just 3 quick points. First of all, was it Ibn Taymiyyah or the author was saying how the first 3 centuries was true Islamic civilization? I find that very funny since, I mean, for the first 300 years, I mean, the theology and the law was being formed. So, I mean, initially, and the Mu'tazila were in control for a lot of that time, persecuting any Muslims who didn't agree with them. So if he's going to say that true Islamic civilization was the early Islamic civilization, then is that Mu'tazila Islam? I mean, these people are incoherent. They just don't know their history. They
use a hadith by the Prophet that says that the best centuries are the one in which I live, the one it follows, and then the third one, and that's why they say so.
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, I don't think any of us would be quite so heavy-handed as the Mu'tazilites, but it does make me smile to think that if Adnan Rashid and Hamza Tsortis were to build a time machine and go back in time to the Golden Age and argue with the Mu'tazilites, that they would end up being decapitated. One Species, thank you for joining us. What's your question?
Hi, good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Okay. Well, I was thinking that, you know, the Roman Golden Age and the Greek Golden Age were never called like the Olympian Golden Age or the Roman religion Golden Age, meaning that they were associated with the people heavily involved in it, not their religion. And that's good because, you know, most of you could not really categorize the Greek natural scientists of the ancient classical age because some of them were atheists, some of them said gods exist, but we shouldn't care because we can't reach them, so it's irrelevant. And some of them were theists, and whether they were wrong or right, you still cannot categorize them in Olympian believing or non-believing scientists. So there were lots of mixed people. So exactly why is so much association going on between the religion of the Golden Age of Middle East? Why is it so associated with the religion and not the particular key people that induced that era? Who chose the name?
Politics. It has to all do with this Islamist revival in the last few decades, and this whole idea that we had to bring back the caliphate, and under the caliphate everything will be super fantastic. Look at all the golden science. It was a great golden age. And so also in line with that, there's been this big confusion where even a lot of Western scholars refer to Islam not only as a religion, but as a region or a political, like they refer to the West and Islam as though Islam is an equivalent to the West, and so they're the golden age of Islam, which is just ridiculous. It's just this very bizarre trait that has emerged.
And one more thing I would like to add is that even at the 5th century before Christ in classical Greece, Zeus was not the accountable creator of the universe. He was a sub-deity. Okay, he was the top god of the Olympians, but he was not the creator because the creator is supposed to be further in time and in strength, further back in time and in strength, even for those people. So even the god they worshipped was not pretty much, you know, he was not responsible apart from the top politics. Like he was, you know, let's say the leader of that land. But as you said, this whole association came on later in history. Maybe Greece and Rome, because they had different religions by the time modern history started happening. Maybe that's why they didn't give that religious twist to that era's findings. Anyway, that's more or less what I wanted to note.
Okay.
Well, I mean, as I was saying before, I mean, the Muslims themselves, during the Golden Age, called science ancient science or rational science. They made a very clear distinction between natural science, i.e., you know, the natural philosophy, real science, and religious practices like Quran, criticism, hadith, authentication, this kind of stuff, that was what they called Islamic sciences. So even the ancient Muslims themselves, living during the time, made a very clear distinction and said, this is ancient science, this is rational science. So it's only a very modern, political-induced phenomena to say that there's this golden age of Islam.
And maybe that's what we should keep putting out there as a message, that this is a roughly 30-year-old idea. That's all for me for now. I'll keep on watching. Have a good one.
Thank you for joining us, and that's a good question. I actually want to expound on that a little bit more in a moment, but first we have another caller, some nobody, who's probably just going to troll us. What do you want?
Good one.
Right, can you see me now? Have I got my camera on? No, hang on.
Look who came crawling back.
Oh, no, hang on, sorry. How you all doing? You all right?
How's it going? What do you have for us today?
Two quick things. One, which is on topic, which was there's a book by Simon Singh called The Code Book, which if anyone's interested in cryptanalysis and cryptography at all, you should definitely read it. And in that he talks about Muhammad receiving revelations as if it were a fact. But the reason he talks about Islam is because the earliest written record of frequency analysis was written by Al-Kindi. And frequency analysis is used for breaking monoalphabetic substitution ciphers. So apparently it was stemmed from people analysing hadiths and things like that to try to authenticate them by saying, oh, Muhammad wouldn't have said that because he didn't speak this way, or something along those lines. But apparently frequency analysis developed out of Muslims researching their religion, and Al-Kindi is the earliest written record of frequency analysis. I thought I'd mention that just as an on-topic thing. And I can't hang around, I've literally got to zoom off. I've just thought I'd mention, because I was on the computer as you were on, because I've just been on Skype talking to another Quran scientist. I've done another interview which I've just recorded. The guy's name was Pete Palmer, and he hasn't really been quoted that much because he made a prepared speech, so he wasn't given lots of questions which he was easy to be quote mined on. But what makes him interesting is he was the origin, he was the very first scientist that they contacted, and he looked at these questions and said, I can't answer these, shall I see if I can find some other people to answer them? And then he went and got some other people. So he was in it right from the start, and you know, participated in about 4 or 5 different conferences. And in his video, This Is the Truth, that Zindani made, Zindani outright lies about what Pete Palmer said. He says, at this point, Pete Palmer said that the Quran must have been a divine light from Allah or something like this. And you know, it's a bit suspicious. This scientist is basically saying this must be a light of science from the divine, and then they don't actually show the clip of him saying it. It's just like, he says all this mundane stuff, then they cut the video, Zindani pops on and says, oh, and then he went on to say Allah told him, you know. We had a chat about it afterwards, and he said Allah must have told him. And I put that to him and said, you know, did you say this? And he just outright said, I didn't say that. I didn't say anything of the sort. So, you know, it's quite interesting. It's going to be on, I'll upload it to the channel, This Is the Truth Uncut.
And
then
I'll also upload it to the Rationalizer.
Yeah. Okay, and that's it. That's it from me. I hope you're all doing well. I've got to zoom off. So it's a flying visit. I'll see you all later. And it's nice to see you all again. See you later.
See you later.
Cheers.
See you guys.
Actually, the whole thing with the frequency analysis brings me back to something else that when Frank was talking about Ibn Taymiyyah before, which is the Qibla, which is basically the Qibla is the direction, because Muslims have to pray towards Makkah, and it's the direction of Makkah from any given location on earth. And some Muslims may claim that this is what really helped to, you know, drive and instigate the sciences of mathematics and astronomy. But the simple reality is that this was not what spurred, this was nowhere in the beginnings of the Golden Age for the Abbasids. It was Persian astrology. Only later did Muslim scientists use the science that was already developing and that had already been instigated previously by previous factors. They used this science for, among many other reasons, religious reasons, i.e. helping to locate and establish the Qibla for Muslims for religious reasons, you know, or using clocks and astrology to help figure out when to pray correctly and so forth. So science was employed for religious reasons, but the religion itself did not inspire and instigate the science. In fact, and this brings us on to another really cool point, which is that Islam actually got in the way of science. And the most spectacular example of this is medicine. Now, there is this thing, you've all heard of homeopathic medicine, and all these funny little folksy remedies that we have in Europe and, you know, the Eurosphere. But there's actually a Middle Eastern equivalent, which they call Unani or Unani medicine, which basically actually means Greek medicine. Basically what happened was when Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East, he took lots of scientists with him, and then basically this science has survived till today. But what happened was this science got mixed also with Arabic science and with something else, which is hadiths, and this becomes the Prophet's medicine. And basically, well, let me read you a few interesting things. According to the Prophet Muhammad, and this is all based from hadiths from Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and Sunan Abu Dawud al-Sijistani. According to the Prophet Muhammad, the three greatest medicines and cures available to mankind are honey, cupping, that is bloodletting, and cauterization, which is branding by fire, although Muhammad instructed his followers not to use the latter for some reason. Muhammad instructed his followers to drink camel's milk and urine as medicine, and stated that certain black seeds could cure any disease except for death. Yeah. He maintained that a type of barley meal invigorated one's heart. He said that wine was a disease and not a cure, right? Which is directly opposite. Now, of course, a lot of doctors say, yeah, one cup of wine a day is great for your health. Muhammad said it is a disease and not a cure. He said that antimony, which I think is a kind of metal or element, is a cure for eye problems and loss of hair, and he claimed that Indian incense can cure 7 diseases, and that mushrooms can cure eye diseases. He said that fevers come from the heat of hell and need to be quenched by water. So if you have a fever, that's actually hell leaking through into you. He said that prayer and reciting the Quran is a great cure, right? Is a cure for snake bites, scorpion stings, and, are you ready for this? The curse of the evil eye. among other things.
I have to read something from the chat just so it goes into the recording on YouTube. Somebody has made the comparison between Ajwa dates and sensu beans from Dragon Ball Z. The one bean that you could have like a giant hole in your chest, and you'd eat one of these sensu beans, and it would just heal you magically up, and you'd be fully restored. So yeah, from now on, I'm going to call those Ajwa dates sensu dates, because they would just. He said in Bukhari and several others, if you took 7 Ajwa dates in the morning, then for the rest of the day, you'd be immune to both poison and curses. And curses. See. There's no pill on the market today that does both of those things. I mean, there's nothing that gives you immunity from curses. Of course, Muhammad was both, according to the tradition, poisoned and cursed during his lifetime. So apparently he was getting a little senile, forgot to take his medicine. He should have had, see, some brilliant Muslim innovator should have come up with the very first one of those little things that old folks get that have their pills in Monday, Wednesday, you know, each day of the week it has the pills they're supposed to take, and he should just put the little dates in there. That way, you know, even as he was getting on in years, he wouldn't have forgotten to take his, you know, his dates.
And yet he had open heart surgery, come on, just before he went up for the...
Angels have very clean hands. They're like doctors.
Yeah, can I read this Sahih hadith about the Prophet medicine?
Please. Yes.
It's in Bukhari. The Prophet says, healing is in 3 things: cupping, a gulp of honey, and branding with fire. But I've heard my followers to use branding with fire. So that's
which is what I was saying
healing,
earlier. Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants, I mean, I have literally like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of hadiths from Bukhari and Muslim, Dawood, which I have linked for every single claim I'm making here. So if anyone actually wants all these, they can just contact me.
And that is actually Islamic science.
I mean, some of it is actually really serious. Like, all these traditions are funny and cute, but there's some shit that's, some information that has actually really serious implications. Muhammad said that any Muslim who dies of the plague dies a martyr. And he commanded his followers that if the plague comes into your country, ignore it. He basically told his followers to ignore plague. He said, don't approach it, right? But don't flee from it. And so this is, I mean, this kind of apathetic attitude towards the plague is, well, has a massive consequences. I mean, given the massive pandemics that swept the world many times, for a prophet to say this is just absolutely atrocious. I mean, for anyone to say that Islam is the basis for science, particularly medical science, I mean, all these traditions which are attributed to Muhammad beg otherwise. And based upon these traditions, actually, Muslims developed what we call the Prophet's medicine, which is still used today. And like Harun Yahya, for example, these kinds of like homeopathic propaganda where they make documentaries. They're Muslim equivalents where they espouse the miracles of the Prophet's medicine and how it works so well. You know, I mean, and Harun Yahya and all these others. But of course, the reality is that most of these cures are extremely superstitious and nonsensical. They don't work. But here we have the Prophet stating as fact that all of this nonsense works as cures. So he's right. This is getting in the way of science. This is stating as fact things which are not true.
But is that the basis? Is that the trigger that started the Golden Age?
No, I mean, well, there's simply no evidence for it. There's no evidence.
Okay.
I mean,
all right, so this is just something that developed and just grew in time.
Yeah, actually, well, I mean, this may tie into the decline, because we still haven't fully established the decline. I did want to get into more of that. I mean, as well as the Mu'tazila and the popular backlash against the Mu'tazila, which was associating Mu'tazila and science and rationalism with tyranny, which became in the popular ethos. There are also other things, which includes this, which so I'll get to that in a second. But I think it's worth looking at a couple of other things. For example, erratic patronage in education. So basically, unlike Western, or well, rather European institutes of learning, so in Europe we had universities, which were actually independent from the state, in that they didn't rely on funding from the king. Universities were self-sustaining, whereas scientists were completely reliant on the financing of emirs and caliphs in the Middle East. And so whenever a caliph was killed, you know, often a scientist would be killed. He had to flee, his library would be destroyed or confiscated, he'd have to find another patron, and then this kept on happening. Not only that, but in the madrasa system, and in the Islamic education system, they didn't teach science. They just completely omitted the natural sciences. The natural sciences were taught by one scientist to a pupil, to an apprentice. So the way that the science was passed down, not only was the patronage completely erratic, but it was like a drip feed transition. Whereas in Europe, for example, we had universities which were self-sustaining, and knowledge was disseminated much more broadly in that fashion. So this also helped to really confine the science of the Middle East. And a big thing was, of course, dogmatism, traditionalism, and ossification. And this relates to the Prophet's medicine. So basically, by the 15th century, by the end of the 15th century, it was the consensus of medieval Muslim doctors and physicians was that the corpus of medical knowledge had reached perfection in the days of Avicenna, and in principle, no change or addition was needed. So basically, by the 15th century, they said, yep, we've got everything now. And they basically, what in medicine was Greek medicine, which is a load of nonsense, mostly. All this stuff about humors and elements and so forth, with additional Arabic innovations, which again is just, a lot of it is nonsense. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but most of it was nonsense. Mixed in with magic and superstition and spirits and demon possession, mixed in with the Prophet's medicine, you know, and you know, recite the Quran and so forth. And this solidified as, by the 15th century, and like, we don't need anything else. I mean, up until the 18th century, the late 18th century, only one medical book was translated into a Middle Eastern language. And that was a 16th century treatise on syphilis. Because syphilis had come, they said that syphilis is a Frankish disease, so syphilis is a European disease, so we can have a European cure. For hundreds of years, one medical book. So by the 15th century, Arabic medicine had completely, and this was not just medicine. I mean, for example, astronomy too became simply. It would be, as Jim Khalili says, that astronomical research in the Islamic world began to wane once it became a mere service industry for Islam rather than a scholarly pursuit in its own sake. So basically, Islam, you know, use astronomy to help with the Qibla and Ramadan, you know, and times and dates and things for religious reasons. And once it became shackled to this, it stopped. It lost all its innovation.
Yeah, I don't buy into the whole thing. I don't think anybody does, but particularly the Qibla excuse. You know, it doesn't take that much work to triangulate in the direction that the sun is rising and the direction that a place on a map is, if you have even half decent cartography, you know. So it's just one of those really kind of lame devices they throw out. There's no way that beyond the utility of identifying a particular angle, you know, why would you need to keep looking up in the sky after that? Doesn't make any sense. But one thing that one species touched on while he was on, and then we had the Rationalizer on, we went off on something completely different. He talked about polytheism and you know, monotheism, and you know, why, you know, just like Ali's comment that I read earlier, you know, why don't the Greeks attribute all of their, or I guess maybe the Greeks did attribute many of their accomplishments to the gods. We don't really know, not that much of their writing meta discussion of their own writings really survives. So modern scholars, obviously, even scholars who practice a faith, virtually never, that I've ever heard, attribute the beliefs of the polytheists to their successes. But what I want to know is polytheism, does anyone on the panel think, less of an obstacle than monotheism to this kind of inquiry? Anyone?
Well, I mean,
or we could open it. We can open up the door a little bit wider and say, how do
I think-
different kinds of religion form different levels of opposition to scientific?
I think freedom of worship definitely is better for freedom of speech and freedom of research. And then when you have like one God and everyone has to worship this God.
Yeah, I mean, there's plurality in polytheism. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but monotheism tends to have a coherent and overbearing clerical body accompanying it, whereas polytheism just didn't really seem to have this. I mean, they had priests, but the priests lived in the temples and did temple stuff. Whereas
you had all the different cults, not one overriding.
Exactly. So, I mean, from simply that, I mean, with that analysis, I would have to say that polytheism would be less of an opposition to science than monotheism.
So it seems the panel thinks that the lack of such a powerful unified clergy was an essentially aid to the early polytheistic thinkers. Is that what I'm hearing?
I would say so.
Freedom of worship in general.
I don't think it matters.
I mean, at the time of...
Let's hear what Stop hasn't spoken on this yet.
Sure.
I don't think anything matters that is opposing to supernatural origins. Whether you have 50 gods or one god, I think it's the same thing. I think as soon as you start going into rational and reasonable thinking, you are going against the gods. And then it wouldn't have mattered whether in ancient Rome or in ancient Greek, you would have come up with, I don't know, speed of light or whatever. If you would have tried to explain in those days that the planet was round and that it was circling around the sun and we were insignificant, I don't think it would have made any difference.
See, earlier on, when we first brought Frank on, he was talking about how the Mutazilites had to compromise Allah's omniscience in order to make certain aspects of their own doctrine and philosophy work. Do you think that the lack of an all-powerful, all-knowing deity, no matter, in a polytheistic religion, is also a boon? Because they don't have to deal with, for example, the modern idea of a God who has every perfection, is what theists will often say. He's perfected. Yes. He's perfectly perfect. He's all-powerful, all-knowing. He can predict all future events. He knows everything that happened in the past. Everything is open to him. Now, the Greeks will sing the praise and the power of the gods of the Hellenic tradition, but these gods aren't portrayed as being all-power. Even Zeus or Cronus, who came before him, they talk about, there's an emphasis that he's powerful. There's one quote from the Iliad where Zeus says that if all the other gods of Olympus were to pull on one end of a chain and he were to pull on the other end, that he would win. But nevertheless, things happen without Zeus knowing it. Things escape his notice, things evade his power. There's a part in the Iliad, I don't know if the Iliad is a one-stop shop for Grecian belief, maybe it was just one guy, but, the god of war himself comes down to earth, and he's fighting with the mortals, and he has a spear thrown and catches him in the stomach, and he has to retreat. These were not all powerful entities. So many of these logical paradoxes, I think, you could get around. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Some Mu'tazila scholars thought that God knows the general picture, but he does not know about the details. They have this, as an ideology.
Yeah, because look at where the gods actually came from. Why were gods created? And how were they created? They filled the gaps. They didn't know how things worked, so this is why they had to, put it they put it up as an explanation, which they called godlike, and they gave it attributes that they didn't know. So if you now come with rational ideas, you are already going against, I mean, what is an example? If you say Neptune, and you say, well, Neptune is not responsible for the tides, it's actually the moon. So you've got gravity. So Neptune is not really a god. He is not really there. It is just a figment of your imagination. You made it up because you couldn't explain the tides. So if you are now coming with rational ideas and with factual explanations, which will make your favorite god Neptune obsolete because you happen to be a fisherman and you like it, I think you're going to be in deep shit there.
I agree that they're both irrational and that you'll be going up against both of them. I mean, polytheism or monotheism, if you're promoting science, etc. But I think that they're different levels. I mean, one is more hostile to science than another, in that polytheism traditionally was disorganized. It was eclectic. Whereas monotheism, we have centralized bodies interfering and controlling the governments with inquisitions and so forth. So directly destroying. I mean, sure, there were. I mean, you know, we have a couple of examples of like atheist philosophers of ancient Greece would have been persecuted. But overall, the level of persecution was minuscule compared to the level of hostility that scholars, I mean, monotheistic clerical bodies subjected science to. I mean, you know, just look at the denunciations that that Ibn Taymiyyah leveled against all the different sciences, as Frank related before, or that scholar relating Ibn Taymiyyah. I just think they're of different. I mean, yeah, they're both irrational, but I think that the level of hostility in monotheism has always been higher towards science.
Any other thoughts? No? I think it's been 2 hours. We're going to wrap it up right there. I thought that was a great episode myself. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you in advance to everyone who watches this on YouTube. And I'd like to thank all the panelists, Stopspamming, Klingschor, Godless, and Frank. And we will see you in 2 weeks, talking about... we haven't decided yet, have we?
Maybe... did Muhammad exist?
Oh, that's right. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about possible... historical revisionism. There are some skeptics today who think that certain characters, including the Prophet, were not actual historical characters. There are also schools of thought that question a wide variety of commonly held beliefs and say that there's more myth than truth to them. So we'll be playing both sides of the debate. We'll essentially be splitting the panel up into teams and arguing the Orthodox school versus the Sunni school. So that should be fun.
Also,
armed with knives or what?
Yes.
Clubs.
And paintball guns.
No, we're going to wrap our arms in that tape and then dip them in glue and then dip them in broken glass and then we come out.
But also find us on Facebook, guys. There'll be a link below in the video when we post this on YouTube. And I'd just like to quickly wrap this up by just saying that given that the golden age of Arabic science arose by secular means, born from the collective achievements of antiquity and sustained by state sponsorship, and met its demise in dogmatism, traditionalism, and theocracy, it is not for any religion to lay claim to the marvelous achievements of that great period in history. The golden age of Arabic science was a triumph of human ingenuity, not religion, and not Islam.
Okay, so...
I can sign that.
Yeah, I think we all could. I'm going to forgo giving the last comments from everyone because I think that pretty much sums up the sentiment that we all share. So we'll see you all again in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Be sure to check out Arab Atheist Broadcast for all of our bilingual viewers and listeners. It goes on... I need to start touching bases with these guys if I'm going to help them plug their show. Is it every Friday or every other Friday? Well, you can look into it. Anyway, be sure to check out our sister show, The Magic Sandwich Show, which goes on the opposite weeks on Sundays instead of Saturdays.
All the links will be below.
Thank you very much. Take care.